Some of my favorite childhood memories took place at my grandparents' cabin. My older brother Louis, my cousins, and I would come every spring break and stay for the week. We would spend the day swimming at the lake and driving around the neighborhood in a golf cart we named Alfie, and playing with the neighborhood dogs. It was quite fun during the daytime. The nights, however, weren't my favorite times. My older cousin Justin invented a little game. It was simple. Basically, we took turns spending 15 minutes in the dark, cramped guest bedroom closets by ourselves. There was nothing special about this closet. The only scary thing about it was that it was a dark room in the bedroom at the back of the house, far away from the safety of the living room, where our beloved grandmother sat in her chair watching Cheers and Frasier every evening. To 6-year-old me, it may as well have been hell itself to be in the dark all alone. I never did make it for the whole 15 minutes. None of the younger cousins did. A fact which our older cousins used to relentlessly tease us about. The 3 older kids, Louis, Justin, and Amaya, all managed to spend the full 15 minutes in the closet. And they all had different stories for what they experienced. Louis claims a ghostly white woman grabbed at his throat. Amaya said a little boy with no eyes appeared beside her, laughing maniacally. But the story that scared me the most was Justin's. He claimed a man with glowing red eyes sat across from him in the closet. "And do you know what he told me, Austin?" he asked me in his dramatically low voice. For a kid of only 10, he sure was a good storyteller. "What?" I asked, peeking out from my blanket, trying and failing to hide my fear. He told me how I would die, how and when, every detail. His eyes gleamed as he spoke, boring into mine. "And, well, how does it happen?" I challenged, secretly hoping he'd end the story already. "I don't think you'd want me to tell you that. See, it's a very gruesome death, very violent, but I can stop it from happening. All I have to do is tell someone else about it." He smiled wickedly. "Then it'll happen to them. Not me. I haven't decided who I'm going to tell. Yet." He winked. "So maybe you should keep that in mind next time you don't want to give up your turn driving Alfie." Looking back now, it was pretty lame. Part of me knew that no kid would be so nonchalant about his upcoming demise, especially one he deemed the worst possible way to go. But anytime we would both reach for the last cookie, or fight whose turn it was to play a game, he would grin and say, "Are you sure you want to make me mad, Austin? You wouldn't want me to tell you a little story now, would you?" And I would always give in. It just didn't seem worth the risk. So that was the closet game. Justin, Louis, and Amaya all loved it. The younger cousins, however, dreaded those nights when one of the older kids would grin and say, "Let's see if you can last in the closet tonight." My younger cousins were Amaya's younger sisters, 7-year-old Lena and 6-year-old Macy. Because they were both girls, the older kids, specifically Justin, didn't hound them nearly as much about being chicken to the last as he did me. "Don't worry about it, man," Louis told me in private one night as we laid down in the guest bedroom for bed after playing the game. "He only gives you a hard time because you react. It's not a big deal if you can't stay in a stupid closet for 15 minutes. Louis was always much nicer to me when the other kids weren't around." "Well, I'm gonna do it one day. I know I will," I declared. I was embarrassed that I'd once again ran out screaming after only a minute or two of sitting alone in the dark. "Sure you will, dude," Louis yawned. After a few minutes, his light snores filled the room as I stared at the watermarked ceiling, wide awake and reeling at how patronizing his tone sounded to my ears. "He's not the best brother, is he?" a voice hissed, jolting me out of my thoughts. I sat straight up in bed and glared at where I thought the voice had come from. It was from the closet. The door was still open a crack. I stared at the silver of darkness within. I started to think the voice must have been my imagination, when a pale white hand extended out of the black and beckoned me close. "Don't be afraid, Austin. I just want to talk." That's when I realized I recognized the voice. "Grandma?" I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. "Come here, Cricket." The voice was definitely hers, although there was something off about it. It wasn't her usual cheery voice. It was slower, more gravely, sinister somehow. But the use of my grandma's special nickname for me lowered my guard a bit. I slowly lowered my feet to the floor and cautiously crept towards the closet. "Grandma?" I repeated. "What are you doing in there?" I could barely make out her frail shape within the small space. She looked to be crouched on all fours, peering through the opening towards me. As my eyes adjusted, I could see that she was smiling. "You sure have been letting the bigger kids get away with a lot lately, haven't you, Cricket?" "What do you mean? Why are you in the closet? I thought you went to bed." I looked over my shoulder at the door, thinking of going to Grandma's room. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, young man." I snapped back to attention. It was so rare for Grandma to snap at any of us kids. I wasn't used to the bite that was suddenly in her tone. Her face was right against the crack of the closet now. It was my grandma, but it wasn't. This woman was grimy. Dirt in the lines on her face. Her teeth were cracked and stained yellow. And her eyes were pure black, darker than the room around her. They seemed to suck me in, like they were absorbing me somehow. I couldn't look away if I wanted to. "Nobody but wimps allows treatment like that," she whispered, those black eyes holding mine. "Brothers are supposed to look out for you, stand up for you, believe in you. When is the last time your brother told Justin to leave you alone?" Never. Louis never defended me to Justin. He was too much of a coward to stand up to the cool older cousin. My grandma grinned at me. "You know what you should do, Cricket?" "Austin? Austin! Get off him! What are you doing?" I suddenly felt several pairs of hands grabbing me and yanking me away. I fell hard to the floor as excited voices yelled all around me. "Louis, are you okay? Is he breathing? Oh God, he's okay. Oh, thank you, God, thank you." "Louis, what happened?" "I don't know, he just went nuts. I don't know." I sat on the floor, trying to process the scene around me. Grandma and all of my cousins were huddled around Louis, who was sitting up in bed looking as dazed as I felt. I suddenly realized I was holding a pillow. The lamp next to the bed had been smashed. The pieces slowly came together over the next hour. Louis had awoken very suddenly when a pillow was slammed over his face. He fought against it, but was surprised how strong the force was. Luckily, his thrashing had knocked over the lamp, which had awoken my cousins sleeping next door, and they had roused my grandma. They ran into the room to find me leaning on the pillow over my brother, an enraged look on my face. It was so out of character for me. I had always been a very timid and easygoing child. Nobody expected such an act of violence out of me. My parents took me to therapy, of course. I told them what I could remember, that my grandmother had come into the room and told me to do it. That was, of course, ridiculous. My grandmother had been sound asleep in her room. There was no question about this, considering all of my cousins had to wake her up, to get her to come save my brother. The therapist never could give my parents any satisfactory answers on why I seemingly snapped. The relationship between my brother and me obviously took a huge hit after that night. It took a long time for him to hang out with me again, even longer to stop sleeping with his bedroom door locked. But eventually, as the months went on without me taking another attempt at his life, he started to relax. My family stopped watching me from the corners of their eyes, like I was a bomb about to go off. The event was chalked up to me being a little boy who was angry at being picked on and didn't know how to express my anger. They kept me in therapy for a while longer, but I had quickly learned not to mention the woman who whispered to me from the closet. I was smart enough to just go along with what the therapist instructed me to do. Breathing exercise when I get angry, talking about my feelings instead of bearing them, etc. And those visits eventually ended as well. That was over 20 years ago. It was still more than an unpleasant memory until last week. when my wife, my 5-year-old son, and I traveled back to my hometown to help my parents arrange my grandmother's funeral. She had passed peacefully in her sleep, and we all knew it had been a long time coming, considering the woman was in her late 90s. I had agreed to go through Grandma's belongings to save my mother the heartache. I was even looking forward to spending time with my son, Rowan, in the same house I had so many happy memories from his age. However, this process was not the fun, sentimental trip down memory lane I had envisioned. Grandma had taken to hoarding in her final years, and trying to separate the trash from the valuables was a time-consuming feat. Plus, my son's constant energy and demand for attention from his mom and me led to me snapping and yelling at much more than I'm proud to admit. After I'd almost lost my mind over him accidentally shattering a glass snow globe that I knew Grandma really loved, my wife decided it was time to call it a night and get some rest. We had planned to book a hotel room, but due to our exhaustion, we decided to just crash in the guest bedroom, all three of us falling onto the bed. This room was surprisingly untouched by Grandma's hoard. I passed out almost immediately. I awoke later to the sound of my wife's voice floating from across the room. I could barely hear her, and was sure she was trying not to wake me. But I've always been an incredibly light sleeper. When I heard Rowan's voice whisper back, I assumed she was just up to help him find his way to the bathroom in the hoard, and rolled over to go back to sleep. Instead, I snapped wide awake when I saw my wife sleeping peacefully beside me, and no Rowan between us. I sat up in bed and turned toward the closet, where the voices were coming from. Dreadful memories rushed back to me as I saw my son crouched in front of the closet door, and made out the words that were being said.
Daddies should never yell the way yours does, Rowan. Why aren't you stopping him?
A distorted version of my wife's voice was whispering. I don't know, Rowan answered.
You know what you need to do, Peanut.
The thing cooed. I'd heard enough. I jumped out of bed and barreled across the room, throwing the door open. Nothing was there. I searched through the hanging clothes and the boxes of junk to no avail. Whatever had been tongue to my son was gone. We left that night, and have never returned. I let my brother finish up the rest of the packing. I never want to see that room, and especially that closet, ever again. This happened to me when I was 11 years old, and I haven't told this story to anyone. I lived in a pretty rural area at the time. Not many kids my age, and not a lot to do. So the one thing I could do was write songs or stories in a notebook. And when I got bored of that, I would exercise. I always took the bus home, but one day I made the decision that I was going to go on the walking trail near my school. I knew my mom would be furious if she found out, so I already asked one of my friends that if mom or dad asked, I was at his house playing video games. When the day ended, I went out one of the side doors of the school to avoid getting caught by teachers, who knew how I got home and what bus I got on, and began the journey of quickly jogging down the side of the road, turning my head away from the road whenever a car drove by. Now bear in mind that I had absolutely zero idea how long this trail was, or where it even ended up at the time. I think I believed that it joined up to the local park near my house, but I wasn't too sure. I began to walk down the dirt path. Tall leaf trees with a variety of shades of bright orange and yellow were on both sides of me. The cool autumn air mixed perfectly with the warm fuzzy feeling of my sweatshirt. Now I'd be lying if I said I saw someone staring at me through the trees, or felt like there was someone behind me or something. But everything was fine, for the first 20 minutes at least. I then all of a sudden heard someone yell my name. At first I thought it was my mom, and I nearly jumped out of my clothes. But after looking to my right, I saw there was an old short woman, probably in her mid-70s or something, waving at me from up a hill. Behind her was a normal-looking house, the kind your grandma would live in. I stopped and didn't make eye contact with her. I'm not good with people, but I knew that if I ran away, I was worried that I would get in trouble. What if this lady knows my mom? What if this lady tails on me? That was my 11-year-old mindset back then. Sweetie, come here. I have something to show you. I gave her a polite smile and began to walk up the semi-steep hill towards the house. I bet you're probably thinking, "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" My mom taught me about stranger danger. but I was such a pushover that you could probably pressure me into jumping off a bridge and I would do it. The lady didn't wait for me. Instead, she turned around and walked into the house, but I could still see her waving me in from a window. So in the process of making the best decision of my life, I walked in through a sliding glass door from the back of the house. The first thing I noticed at the time was how the house was extremely clean and well kept. It had fairly dated furniture, but other than that, it was quite cozy. After standing there for a moment, I heard the woman's voice again. She had the "I've been smoking a pack of cigarettes a day for 50 years" type of voice. But my grandmother smoked, so it wasn't too odd. I couldn't tell where the voice was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from every room. "Honey, just stay there. I want to show you something," she yelled out. I look around. There was a tiny kitchen to my left with a connecting living room. To my right there was a dining room, and directly in front of me were stairs that led to a hallway that went into two directions. Curiosity got the better of me and I started to poke around. I walked over to the kitchen. The counters were spotless, and the floor was too. There was a sink with a window above it, the same window that the old lady was standing just a moment ago. "Excuse me?" said a small voice from behind me. I turned 180 degrees and almost screamed. There was a tiny boy, probably 8 or 9 years old, standing at the bottom of the stairs. I had never seen him before in the neighborhood, but he looked nice enough that I let my guard down. "Who are you?" he asked. I told him my name and he smiled. "I'm Peter. Would you like to play a game?" He sounded like the most innocent kid I'd ever heard in my life. "Sure," I responded. "Do you want to play? I love hide and go seek. Don't you? I'll hide and you come find me." Before I could even accept his game, he had already ran up the stairs. "Wait," I yelled up to him. "How long do I count for?" He didn't respond. Well, I suppose if this lady's going to make me wait, I might as well have a little fun. 1, 2, 3, 4. I started counting. I thought 15 was a good stopping point. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Ready or not, here I stopped. I opened my eyes, and the house looked completely different. Almost everything here was black, old, and very, very dirty. "Peter?" I called out. There was no answer. Now I could have run out of the house right then and there, but Peter was up there. He might have been scared. I tried the steps. I put one foot on the old black step, and it instantly broke from under me. Keeping my balance, I decided to try the next step. It actually held together, and so did the next. I was careful and made my way up the stairs into the hallway. "Peter? Are you up here?" I called out. "I'm hiding," Peter responded. The voice sounded like it was coming from every room, even downstairs too. "What happened to the house?" I said, getting slightly scared at this point. "I don't know what you mean," Peter responded back. I walked down the hallway and took my first room on the right. It was an old bedroom. I then heard Peter again. I was sure he was inside of this room. He was quietly giggling to himself. "Peter? This isn't funny anymore. Come out from where you're hiding," I demanded. The laughing stopped. There was a large bed to the left of me, and a wardrobe near a smashed window, and then a small closet. The sheets were still on the bed, and there was a large lump under them. "Peter, I found you," I said, pulling the sheet back. Under that sheet was an old woman, probably in her mid-70s, burnt to a crisp. I stepped back in shock. "Peter!" I yelled out. I then heard something to my right. "I'm in here!" It came from the closet. I opened up the closet door, and sitting in a curled ball was a little boy, about 8 or 9. He was charred. I stepped back and screamed. That's when the head of the body turned and faced me. "Is there something wrong?" I let out a blood-curdling scream and ran out of the room. I had to get out of there. I flew down the stairs, completely forgetting that the first step was broken. I stepped right into it and fell flat on my head, twisting my ankle in the process. "Where are you going? It's my turn now." Through pure adrenaline or Jesus Christ, or maybe a little of the two, I threw the door open and practically rolled down the hill, limping my way down the trail back to where I came from. After about 20 minutes, I made it back to the main road. The driver stopped and took me to the hospital. After that, my parents came. They were worried sick and had already called the police. So much for my video games at a friend's house plan. I told my parents about the trail, but I didn't tell them about the house. My parents were mad and I got in trouble, but overall they were happy I was safe. The reason I'm writing this now is because recently I thought about this incident, and I had to get to the bottom of it. I went back to my hometown. My parents moved away to a different state, so they no longer lived in my old house. I went back to the school and took the same trail near there, and headed back down the path. It wasn't autumn anymore, so the charm of the forest kind of worn off at this point. That's when I saw it. It was the house. It didn't look the same as before. There was construction tape wrapped all around it, and the construction worker stood around the outside. I walked up the hill to the house, and a construction worker stopped me. "Hey, this area is off limits. This place is scheduled for demolition today." I looked at him, confused. He then continued, "Yeah, this place burned down in like 1920 or something, and ever since then it's just been rotting here."